Okay, good afternoon, everyone. You know, before the session began, I was thinking to myself, well, if no one shows up, that's a good sign, because you've all got brilliant architecture practices. So I'm a bit concerned that there's so many people here. But anyway, thank you for coming. So we're going to look at this question about how do you know if you've got a good architecture practice. And you know, as an analyst, you know, we do the inquiry calls, and we get a lot of calls basically around that question. And the reason is, I think, that architecture's been around for a long time. You know, really, if you look back in the 80s, IBM started it with business systems planning. John Zachman created the Zachman framework around 1987. You know, and architecture became a formal practice rolling forward. But recently, you know, what we've seen is things like a shift towards a federated model, you know, where control for, particularly around digital strategy and innovation, shifted out of the business, out of IT and into the business. You get these federated models, often using a product management approach rather than traditional project management. Of course, you know, as you've heard a lot at the conference, there's all these AI tools coming along. So, you know, we get a lot of questions. Well, is architecture still useful and still relevant? And how would we know if many organizations have a practice they've had a long time, which is very traditional? How do we know if that's still relevant? So that's the question we're going to explore today, and like I said, it's a common question and a very topical question. So let's begin. Is that, you know, we all know what good architecture is, and I picked that picture purposely. That's the entranceway to the British Museum in London. So if you're ever in London, definitely go and see the British Museum. But if architecture is working really well, you know, one of the things that architecture does is help us engage different stakeholders, from the business through to IT, maybe externals. People are engaged. Architecture becomes a common language of collaboration. Business and IT are aligned. You know, there isn't any separation. They have to talk to each other, and there's a way that they can talk to each other. We get simpler, better, cost-effective design systems. They're agile and adaptive. You know, we're making use of the latest ideas in architecture, like modularity, service orientation, and so on. So we know that good architecture, whether it's a building or whether it's an IT system, we know it when we see it. I mean, you know it has, you know, power and good value. So, you know, architecture can be a really important force for good. We also know bad architecture when we see it, you know, and this is, you know, a lot of the problems with, inverted commas, traditional approaches to architecture can be overbearing and bureaucratic. You know, architectures focus more on compliance and standards and giving you parking tickets if you didn't follow the standard. So it's very command, control, compliance centric. It slows down creativity and innovation, you know, because we have to go through so many reviews and so many checklists and get sign-offs. And basically, people avoid it, you know, people don't want to go to review boards and so on. So, you know, architecture can stifle innovation, can give a feeling that really what matters is, did you comply with the standard rather than did you have a great design? It doesn't bring life into a project or initiative. So that leads us to, you know, what you might think is a relatively startling conclusion, is that no architecture is better than bad architecture. And let me qualify that for a moment and say what I really mean by that is that an architecture that is bureaucratic, dogmatic, it's really focused on standards, it happens late in the day, it's a problem. And what it really means is that when you want to do architecture properly, you know, you reach a point where you realize that you must do it well, having bad architecture just makes it 10 times worse. So one of the ideas that will come across in this presentation is that if you're going to do architecture, you need to do it well or don't bother, because it will just make your life worse. So no architecture is better than bad architecture. So if we're going to do architecture and get the benefits of good architecture, we really do need to do it well. Now, of course, then that leads to that question of how would you tell the difference between a good architecture practice and a bad architecture practice? Because there are some things about architecture which make answering that question a little bit more challenging. Okay, so the first among, get me bills right. The first among that is EA is designed to deliver long-term strategic benefits. When you think about architecture, architecture works across 3 time frames. You know, there's the, if you like, the short-term immediate, this project, this initiative. There's the medium term, which is, you know, the strategy. You know, what are we working on this year or this period? And then there's a very long-term view, which is, you know, what's the future state architecture? What will our organization look like in the world of AI? And those 3 work together. But often what organizations only see is today's projects and initiatives, where architecture is trying to deliver value over the longer term. So that's one area of challenge. The next problem or challenge with understanding architecture is EA's benefits, you know, can be qualitative. So, you know, it's very hard to manage or measure, you know, the level of collaboration you get between business and IT that's facilitated by architecture. You know, how would you assess the quality of the decisions that are made because they've been influenced by the analysis of architecture? So, you know, often architecture can be a little bit intangible and focused on qualitative benefits. In many ways, architecture is a way of collaborating, a way of orchestrating decision-making, but measuring that can be a bit difficult. Stakeholders see EA as a governance bottleneck, and often the main reason that stakeholders have problems with EA is they can't just do what the hell they like. You know, it's as simple as that. Interestingly, and I'll be honest, I'm getting on my soapbox now. Interestingly, we live in the culture of the hack. You know, just do it quickly. No, some things that's useful for, but in many things in life, it's having it done properly, doing it methodically and rigorously, and that's actually quite useful. So if you're in a building, you don't want the roof falling in your head, so that the fact that the builder has just nailed it up might not be a good thing, you know, having good design, proper materials. So sometimes the best way to do something is the long way around, you know, and that's, if you think about it, the architecture process and the way of doing architecture is about doing it properly, not doing it the hack, you know, and cutting through it. So often people find that a challenge and complain about architecture, not because architecture is a problem, but because they can't just do what the hell they like. So that's another challenge. Poorly implemented EA can appear as an overhead and not deliver benefits. So in other words, sometimes the problem isn't architecture per se, is that the practice has been not well designed. That's something we'll talk about again here. And, you know, last one is EA often works behind the scenes by working with stakeholders, by bringing people together, by involving and encouraging people. So when you think about a good practice and a bad practice, it often comes down to that old idea that EA tends to be a catalyst for change, as well as a driver for a change, in the sense that it brings stakeholders together, it facilitates work, it facilitates quality decision-making, but it might not often be responsible for that decision or responsible for that outcome. So it's often hard to tell. So, you know, bringing that back down, then is that how can we be sure that we know what good architecture is, and we definitely want that. We know what bad architecture is, and we definitely don't want that. And in fact, no architecture is better than bad architecture. So how would you know? How would you decide? So what we're going to do is run through a step-by-step process to do that. What I've done as well is I've used kind of standard Gartner tools to do that. So all the tools that we talk about in this presentation are pretty much available to you now as well anyway. But I'll run you through that. But let's begin at the beginning, is that the first thing we want to focus on is deciding exactly what we want from an architecture practice. Now, this is important because out of the gates, just doing architecture is not good enough. Because some people think that if we do architecture and we follow TOGAF, good things will happen. Well, that's just not the way it works. You know, we have to be very focused in what we do about architecture. So the cornerstone of all this analysis is figuring out what is it you want from your EA practice. Then we're going to look at how you evaluate your EA practice, and in good Gartner style, then we'll talk about, okay, what can you do about it where there are gaps? Okay, so let's begin with decide what you want for the EA practice. And this is often, something that the CIOs definitely need to do. Right, so the first thing to begin with is define your value proposition for EA. I've just used a general one. What the Gartner mantra is EA is a form of internal management consulting. It's about helping business and IT stakeholders with the modeling and analysis and guidance to make smart, informed decisions. I've just cut it down a little bit. And you see, like in good value proposition format, we identify who's going to get the benefits, what the benefits are, and why. But let me say it in a much more blunt way, is that when we talk to our clients about an EA practice, this is the what's the point question. Because if you really can't define why your organization or what your organization is going to get from an EA practice, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. So what we really want to do is be really clear about who is going to get the benefit of EA? Who are the stakeholders in the organization that's going to get the benefits of EA? What is EA doing for them? Why is that really useful to them? And what are they getting? So like I say, being really clear about what's the value of the architecture practice to the organization? Why are we doing this? So I can't emphasize that enough, because if you get stuck at this point, it's not worth going any further. So you have to be really clear about what's your value proposition. So, take some time to think. Like I said, there's standard tools around this, but really is who's going to be the beneficiary of this good EA stuff? What types of benefit are they going to get from it? And why are we doing this? What is it that is the organization going to benefit from it? So that's the cornerstone, the what's the point question. Okay, so let's define that first. Now, the next piece we want to move on to is, like I said, we don't want to be in a position of a traditional EA practice where we just do EA and hope good things will happen. No, particularly these days, is that what we want to be really clear about is what EA is going to focus on. In the sort of, the Gartner language, we call that mission critical priorities, but essentially, from your perspective, particularly as a leader of EA or CIO, is what is it that architecture is going to do for you? And it says illustrative, but these are three common outcomes that we've seen architecture focus on recently. So one is support the execution of business transformation. I mean, I'm sure you're a bit like me, as business transformation seems to be a topic that has been around for a long time, but as you can guess, is that we're coming into a new wave of business transformation, often driven by, inverted commas, the promise of EA. So, we need to be clear about what is it we want EA to do? Support business transformation. That could be its focus. Or it could be cut the cost and complexity in the IT platform. Make our IT platform simpler, lower cost, more adaptive and agile. That's what EA should be doing in our organization. Or improve productivity and performance through AI tools. That's a common theme. Actually, number 3 and number 1 are often combined. So we move from, let's be really clear about the value proposition. What is it we want EA to do? To what let's use that term, what mission-critical priorities is architecture going to focus on in our organization? What is it we want them to be focused on? So that's the second cornerstone. Okay, so let's take the next step, is that flowing on from that, we're often looking for particular benefits from an EA practice. These are common ones, is that I'll split this into business and technology benefits. So business benefits, that business and technology strategy are aligned. They line up. That's one benefit we want to get from doing this EA stuff. Or that we have better decision making, another business benefit. Or increased product efficiency at reduced cost. I'll just run through these. We are more agile and adaptive. Well, let me just tell you a little story of this. So one of our clients that I've been working with recently is, so what they're trying to do is, their value proposition for them is help us drive a big transformation project. They're replacing the old monolithic ERP system with, again, consulting speak, inverted commas, a hollow ERP system, which is a very basic ERP backbone with a set of best practice applications tied to it, aligned to the different business units in the organization. So you get this federated business model, platform, a core service of ERP with best of breed applications sitting across that. So that's what I want my architecture practice to do. So that's what we want from there. So what do we want in terms of business benefits? We want the business executives and business managers engaged in this process. We want EA to work closely with change management, so as we create this model, it flows out and is adopted well. We want to be able to work with our integrators and partners and bring them into the conversation. Right, that's another benefit we're looking for from EA. And we also want this project to, stay on time, on budget, and deliver within its costs. So that'll be the phone. So, what we're looking for then is to help us with this big transformation and specific business benefits. That's what I want my EA practice to do. Okay, I'll whiz through these, this one. So, the technology benefits of EA, I'll just summarize that one for you, is that quite often the technology benefits of architecture is that, these days, architectural style tends to be modular, service-oriented, API-based in the cloud. So use architecture to help us be more agile and adaptive, to help us adopt to change, to help us be able to control technology change. So what you get then is, I'll pull this all together. We've identified what's the value proposition of architecture to the organization. What are the big transformational projects or the big things that EA should be doing for us, and what are the specific benefits? Now we can then take another step and say, what are the metrics and KPIs? So if that's the project I'm interested in, these are the benefits that I'm after, what are the metrics and KPIs that are involved in that. Now that forms the cornerstone of the analysis. Value proposition, key projects, business benefits, technology benefits, and as a result of that, a set of metrics. So that's the homework we have to do before we leap into the analysis. Now, what we're going to do in the analysis is we're going to take two perspectives. We're going to go outside in and inside out. And the idea is that, we want to get a rounded picture of the EA practice. We want to really start with this idea about benefits, but we're going to take more of a wider perspective. So let's think about that again. Oops, did it come up? Okay, evaluate. So the first step we want to do is map the EA practice against the benefits model we just developed. So these are the outcomes I want. These are the mission-critical priorities. These are the business benefits I'm seeking. I've taken another step and developed the metrics against that. Now, what I want to do is evaluate my EA practice against that. Now, often, a good way to do this is to, particularly for CIOs, is bring together the team. Maybe you don't involve the EAs in this bit, and you run through this model and you look at, given this framework, what contribution is EA making to this, making to deliver this? How are they delivering against the metrics we've identified? So what you're aiming to do is understand the contribution of the architecture practice to the key outcomes and benefits that we're seeking. So that is outside-in piece number one. Is architecture doing what we really need it to do in our organization? So that's the first key piece. The next outside-in model is let's talk to the customers of EA, the stakeholders. Now, what we often joke about and say is that EA is 90% people, 10% architecture. And the people piece is the hard one. So apart from, is it doing what we want? And what we want to do then is look at the business executives, the team leaders from within the IT organization, the people EA work for, and actually say, how is EA supporting you? What's that like? And again, using our model, there's inverted commas, a quality of service framework that you can use, and it's got those components about competence, do they know what they're doing, reliability, and so on. And the idea is what we would do is we would go identify a set of stakeholders, maybe on the business, inside IT, who EA work with, and go and talk to them and say, did you really find value in the EA team and its deliverables? How do you rate their professionalism? And like I say, it's a proper framework that's put together. And what we're trying to do is see what are the customer's perspective, on the EA practice. So now I've got, does it do what I want it to do? And what are the customers saying about it? I personally think this is one of the most important ones of the two. So that's the outside-in perspective on the practice. Now let's take an inside-out perspective on the practice. So what we really want to know is, do I have a team or do I have a collection of individuals, who sit and report into architecture? And one way of doing that is there's an assessment which comes from, it's like the team effectiveness diagnostic. That's been built that you can use for this, is that what we want to do now is these are the pieces that the architecture team is doing, is assess how effective you are working together as a team and delivering EA. So it's interesting how effective you are successfully influencing decisions. Whoops. How good are you at delivering on your promises? And lastly, are you adaptive and ahead of trends? So what we're asking the team to do is come together, now make an assessment based on the team effectiveness diagnostics, make an assessment about how you're working together at the team to deliver value to the organization. So that's piece number one of the inside-out approach. And of course, for those of you who are familiar with it, the next piece we can do is get the team to do the EA IT score assessment. This is a maturity assessment that we developed. This one isn't, as you say, it's just an example, so they're all at 1. They range from 1 to 5. As you can see, it's essentially the building blocks of an EA practice arranged into pillars, and the scores range from 1 to 5. So now we can get the team to look at doing an assessment of the maturity of the building blocks of your practice. So that leads us to this point. So what we've done now is that we've taken these 4 pieces. The outside-in perspective, delivery on business outcomes. Is the architecture practice doing what you need it to do? The customer satisfaction. What are the stakeholders who are the recipients of this good architecture stuff saying? Are they actually finding this valuable and useful? And then the inside-out perspective is getting the team to say, how are we doing on performance? Are we being an effective team and delivering value, what we think is delivering value? And what's our level of maturity of the EA practice? How are we doing on the building blocks? Now, for those of you who score green in all 4 of those, thanks for coming. It was nice to see you here. But for everybody else, the reality is, in 99% of the cases, what you get is a mix. And we want to move now into okay, how do we take a step forward? So let's spend a little bit of time just on this last bit about. If your EA team needs to raise its game, let's begin with 4 actions. What are the 4 things that you can do for this? I picked number 1 as one of my favorites, is that really what we want to do is create an effective team. I think we don't necessarily want to focus initially really hardly on can you do capability modeling really well? Number 1 is I really want to create an effective team. And the best way of doing that is by instilling a growth mindset in the team. And the idea is that, what the growth mindset is doing, and it was developed by psychologist Carol Dweck, and it's really talking about, and it's, we've applied it and looked at lessons from high performance sport, but it's really about how do you learn, how do you grow and become a much more effective team. I'll just put these up. So it has these 5 components about reframing challenges as opportunities, because let's be honest, often the feedback on the EA team is not 100% positive, so you don't want that to be perceived as entirely negative. How can you reframe a challenge as an opportunity? How can you embrace and learn from failure? Let's celebrate effort over talent. Let's make sure we focus on the energy that's been put in. Let's seek constructive feedback. This is the coaching and openness and cultivating curiosity and learning. So I think one of the most important things we can do to begin with is let's create a team. Let's create an atmosphere of how can we learn? How can we improve? How can we do this better? How can we take on the feedback that we're getting through this process? Because what we've run through, you should do regularly, at least once a year. How can we do that in a way that makes sense and we can build that team ethic? So creating a growth mindset within the team, bringing them together so that they can step forward. I think that's the number one priority. Now we can do some of the more sort of methodology things. The next thing is that as particularly a CIO or a leader, we've identified the outcomes and the benefits. The bottom here is a set of services. Is that what we want to do is say, what is it that EA is doing for the organization? That is often a set of services. They can be business services like things like capability-based planning, human-centric design, or customer-facing service design, and so on. Or they can be technology services like technology strategy and so on. What we want to do is, number one, is make sure that we're really clear about the outcomes and the benefits. And what we've done is we've identified the services that EA is bringing to the table to deliver those benefits and those outcomes. So let's do that. Next piece then is metrics and KPIs. Essentially, again, because we want to keep improving, we've got to have some metrics. Generally, there are two flavors of metrics: quantitative, which align with the services that EA is delivering, and qualitative, which is the voice of the customer metrics. We want to bring those together into a set of metrics that we can use to drive our EA practice forward through sets of iterations. So let's develop a set of metrics that can guide the practice. And, last piece there is that really what we want to do is then look at that maturity model and identify which of those building blocks really do need improvement, set a level for those. In other words, we might want to pick this one and say, look, we want to be at level 4. What's the roadmap for that? Look at the building blocks, develop a roadmap. So what we do then is just summarize that, bring those 4 elements together, build a team, create a growth mindset, focus EA services on delivering the benefits and outcomes that you really want, create a set of metrics, quantitative and qualitative, service-orientated and voice of the customer-orientated, that can really tell if the EA practice is doing well, and then look at the basic maturity of some of those building blocks and look at improving it and bringing it into line. So I'll just draw that all together, and then we'll stop. Is that, how do you evaluate it? Number one, decide what you want from EA practice. Don't do random EA stuff. Be very specific. What's the value proposition? What are the outcomes you're after? What are the benefits you're seeking? And that's got to be the cornerstone of the analysis. Evaluate your EA practice, again, outside in, the benefits, the voice of the customer, and inside out, which is team effectiveness and maturity. Then what we can do then is develop a roadmap to improve your EA practice. And remember that this isn't once and done. Because our world is changing so fast, the chances are that you're going to be doing this every year, at least, if not more often. Then you can keep your EA practice aligned with what you need to do. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There's of course an action plan. All of that assessment exists as toolkits that you can draw on, and you can also find us analysts anytime. You know what I look like. Sort of a bit like a sort of Kiwi version of Richard Gere. But so you know where to find me, and I'd be more than happy to help if you need anything. Okay, thank you very much.